Jax ran. The pounding of his boots against the metal streets was lost beneath the blaring alarms and the heavy thud of enforcers in pursuit. His lungs burned, but he pushed forward, weaving through the industrial sprawl of the slums. The neon glow of street signs flickered in and out of focus as he dodged past startled vendors and loose cargo. Behind him, the enforcers weren't just chasing. They were herding him, cutting off escape routes with ruthless efficiency. These weren't the usual lazy thugs for hire. This was a trained unit. Shit. Jax's mind raced. His original escape plan, double back to the docking bay, slip onto his ship, and burn thrusters, was already shot to hell. They were pushing him further away from his ship, further into the labyrinth of alleyways and abandoned storage yards at the city's edge. He yanked a stolen comm from his belt, flipping through frequencies. Static. More static. Then, Sector C sealed. Confirm visual on target. Jax swore. They had a perimeter set up. If he didn't break their line now, he'd be boxed in. A sharp whistle from the rooftops. Jax glanced up just in time to see his sniper take position. Nope. He threw himself sideways as the shot fired, the heat from the blast scorching the air where he'd just been. He rolled, came up running, and spotted a narrow maintenance tunnel between two warehouses. It was dark, rusted, and smelled like something had died inside. Perfect. Jax darted in. A split second later, another shot rang out, sparking against the metal frame. Too damn close. He sprinted through the tunnel, twisting through a series of turns until he emerged into an old cargo yard. Dozens of shipping containers were stacked haphazardly, some rusted open, others still sealed. No movement. No lights. Good enough. Jax picked the closest container with a gap in the door and slipped inside, pulling it shut just enough to blend into the shadows. He pressed his back against the cold metal, forcing himself to slow his breathing. Outside, boots stomped against the pavement. Spread out. One of the enforcers barked. He's in here somewhere. Jax flexed his fingers, itching for his blaster, but he knew better. A shootout would only draw more attention. He just had to wait. Let them sweep through. Then, the sound of chains. A faint rattle. Slow. Deliberate. Jax's instincts went razor sharp. He wasn't alone. He turned, scanning the darkness. At first, all he could make out were the vague outlines of crates and cargo. Then, movement. A figure, small and motionless, huddled in the farthest corner of the container. She was bound. Shackles at her wrists and ankles, metal cuffs dull in the dim light. Her skin was a deep, unnatural blue, smooth but bruised. Silver markings trailed along her collarbone, glowing faintly, pulsing like a weak heartbeat. Her hair was white, long, tangled, falling over her shoulders like a shattered halo. But it was her eyes that caught him, luminous and wide, reflecting the sliver of light between them. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't crying. She was waiting. Jax exhaled slowly. He knew the look. It was the same one he'd seen on prisoners left to rot in black market cages. The same emptiness of someone who had long since given up on rescue. His stomach twisted. Not my problem, he told himself. He had his own mess to deal with. He should leave, slip away before the enforcers circle back. He should. A muffled voice crackled in his stolen comm. 5 minutes until drones sweep the area. Jax clenched his jaw. If he left her, she was as good as dead, or worse. Damn it. He crouched, keeping his hands where she could see them. I'm not here to hurt you. He wasn't sure if she understood him, but he kept his voice low, steady. I'm getting you out of here. She didn't react. Not at first. Then, her fingers twitched against the shackles, curling slightly. Not quite trust, but not refusal either. Jax pulled his plasma cutter from his belt. Hold still. The first shackle broke with a soft snick. The second. The third. The last one fell away, clattering against the metal floor. For a moment, she just stared at her freed wrists, as if unsure whether to believe it. Jax offered his hand. She hesitated. Then, with the smallest movement, her cold fingers ghosted against his. A silent choice. All right, he murmured. Time to move. He pushed open the container door, peering into the night. Coast clear, for now. He glanced back at her. Stay close, got it? She nodded once. As they stepped out into the open air, Jax felt the weight of a decision he couldn't take back. Then, just as they slipped into the shadows, she whispered something. A single word in a language he didn't understand. Jax didn't know what it meant, but the way she said it, soft, cautious, almost reverent, sent a chill down his spine. And then, in the distance, an alarm blared to life. They weren't safe yet. The alarm's shrill cry echoed off the towering stacks of cargo containers, making it impossible to tell where the enforcers were coming from. He didn't need to see them to know they were close. A voice crackled through the stolen comm at his belt. Perimeter lockdown initiated. No one in or out. Jax cursed under his breath. If it didn't get out of this district now, they weren't getting out at all. His ship, the Black Star, was docked at the far end of the city's trade port, a solid mile away. A mile of exposed streets, security checkpoints, and heavily armed bastards who wanted them dead. Beside him, the woman, Sarah, he reminded himself, moved with silent grace, her glowing silver eyes scanning the darkness ahead. She still hadn't spoken more than a few words to him, but that didn't matter right now. What mattered was that she kept up. "Come on," Jax muttered, leading her through a narrow maintenance corridor between two warehouses. He was about to step out the other side when he caught movement in the reflection of a rain-slicked metal wall. Drones. Jax yanked Sierra back just as a sleek, black reconnaissance drone hovered past their hiding spot, its scanner sweeping over the alley. He held his breath, counting the seconds. 5, 10. The drone whirred and continued forward, moving on to search another sector. Jax exhaled. Too damn close. Sierra's gaze flicked to him, unreadable. She never looked panicked, only wary, cautious, watching. It was as if she had spent her entire life expecting danger, always bracing for the inevitable. Jax clenched his jaw. They had to keep moving. He led her toward the trade port, slipping through gaps in old infrastructure, past abandoned machinery and forgotten storage yards. Every step brought them closer to freedom. Every step felt like borrowed time. The enforcers were closing in. He could hear them now, their heavy boots crunching against metal grates, their voices barking orders in the distance. Sweep teams. They weren't just searching anymore. They were funneling them in a specific direction. Jax realized it a second too late. They rounded a corner and found themselves staring down a wide, dead-end loading bay and a squad of armed enforcers blocking the only exit. Jax skidded to a stop, grabbing Sierra's arm and yanking her back just as gunfire erupted. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal walls. "Damn it! Find cover!" Jax shouted, ducking behind a stack of shipping crates as a hail of plasma rounds tore through the alley. Sierra followed, pressing herself against the metal, her breathing steady despite the chaos. Jax peeked over the crate. 5 enforcers, heavily armored, well-trained. They couldn't fight their way through that. He needed another way out. Jax's mind raced as he scanned their surroundings. Then he saw it, a transport drone hovering just overhead, attached to an old crane system. The control panel was on the opposite wall, past the enforcers. "Stay here," he muttered. Before she could protest, Jax vaulted over the crates and dashed toward the controls, weaving between enemy fire. He hit the panel hard, rerouting power, and the drone lurched into motion, its attached cargo swinging wildly. The enforcers shouted in alarm, right before the massive crate slammed into them, scattering them like ragdolls. Jax wasted no time. He sprinted back to Sierra and grabbed her hand. "Move!" They climbed over the wreckage and disappeared into the next alley before backup arrived. By the time they neared the shipyard, Sierra was slowing down. Jax noticed it immediately. Her steps faltered, her normally fluid movements growing sluggish. When she stumbled, he turned just in time to catch her before she fell. "Hey, what's wrong?" She was shaking. Jax frowned, shifting his grip to lower her against the tunnel wall. The faint glow in her silver markings was flickering dim. Now that he was paying attention, he could see it. She wasn't just exhausted. She was weakening. Jax clenched his jaw. "You should have said something," he muttered. Her expression flickered, confusion, then something like shame. Jax let out a breath, frustrated but not at her. At himself. He'd been so focused on getting them out. He hadn't stopped to consider how much she had already endured. He reached for his belt and pulled out a water flask, pressing it into her hands. Drink. She hesitated, then took a slow sip. Jax ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. All right, we'll rest for a minute, but then we have to move. He stood to check the path ahead, but the second he turned, her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Don't leave. Jax froze. The way she said it, it wasn't a plea. It was a statement, quiet but unshakable. She had been abandoned before. She wasn't asking if he would do the same. She was telling him not to. Jax swallowed. Slowly, he crouched back down. I won't, he promised. A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, she nodded. He sat beside her, listening for patrols above. After a moment, he dug through his belt pouch and pulled out a small ration pack, tearing it open before handing it to her. She took it hesitantly. When she bit into it, her expression shifted. First surprise, then hunger. Slow down, Jax muttered. You'll make yourself sick. She glanced at him, then tore off a small piece and handed it back to him. Jax blinked. Of all the things he expected, he huffed a quiet laugh. All right, fair enough. He took the piece and popped it into his mouth. They sat in silence for a moment. Then, from the surface, the sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the tunnel. Jax tensed. He knew that sound. Drones. Scanning. Searching. They weren't safe yet. Jax stood, gripping his blaster. We need to go. Sierra pulled herself up beside him, her glow returning slightly. Jax checked the path ahead. If they could just get past the final checkpoint, they had a straight shot to his ship. He glanced back at her, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the way she steadied herself despite the exhaustion. Ready, he asked. She nodded once. Jax pushed forward, heart hammering. By the time they reached the Black Star, the enforcers were seconds behind them. Jax slammed his hand against the ship's access panel, and the ramp hissed open. Go, he ordered. Sierra didn't hesitate this time. She ran inside, disappearing into the cargo bay. Jax turned and fired a few cover shots before hauling himself inside, just as bullets rained down on the hull. The moment his boots hit the deck, he hit the controls, sealing the ramp shut. He sprinted to the cockpit, Sierra right behind him. Jax barely had time to strap in before enforcer ships appeared on the radar. Too damn close. Hold on, he growled, grabbing the flight controls. The engines roared to life. A second later, the Black Star shot into the sky, leaving the planet and their pursuers far behind. Jax let out a breath as the familiar hum of hyperspace filled the cabin. They had made it, but somehow, he knew this was only the beginning. The Black Star cut through hyperspace, the swirling blue currents of faster-than-light travel casting shifting patterns across the cockpit. The hum of the engines was steady, rhythmic, normally a sound Jax found comforting. But right now, there was an unfamiliar weight pressing against the quiet. Sita. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, curled into herself, silver eyes reflecting the hyperspace tunnel beyond the viewport. She hadn't moved since they jumped, hadn't spoken, hadn't reacted when Jax took the controls and got them the hell out of that system. She just watched. Jax exhaled and leaned back in his chair. His body still buzzed with residual adrenaline, but now that they were out of immediate danger, something else had started creeping in, the realization that he had no idea what came next. He wasn't even supposed to be in this mess. His plan had been simple: deliver stolen ship schematics to a buyer, get paid, and move on. But that job had gone to hell fast, and now here he was, playing babysitter to a mysterious, half-starved alien woman with glowing skin and a target on her back. Jax ran a hand down his face. What the hell am I doing? She was still staring out at the lights, still as a statue. Jax drummed his fingers against the console. You hungry? No response. He frowned. He wasn't great at this kind of thing, dealing with people who had been through whatever she'd been through. He had seen plenty of slaves, prisoners, and trafficked beings in the underbelly of the galaxy, but he had never been in the position to help one. And he sure as hell wasn't the hero type. Jax sighed and stood. Come on, he said, nodding toward the ship's galley. You gotta eat something. She hesitated before uncoiling from the seat, following him into the narrow corridor. Jax kept an ear out for any irregular sounds, old habits from years of looking over his shoulder, but all he could hear was the hum of the ship. For now, they were safe. He opened a storage compartment and pulled out a ration pack, tearing it open and setting it on the counter. Sierra stood in the doorway, unmoving. Jax lifted an eyebrow. "You waiting for permission?" Her eyes flicked to him, then to the food. Slowly, cautiously, she moved forward. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing the pack before she hesitated again. Jax sighed. "It's not poison, you know." Still nothing. Then at last she took it. She sniffed the contents first, smart, he noted, then nibbled at the edge. Her expression flickered, just for a second, with something like surprise. Jax leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Guess that means you like it." She didn't answer, but she took another bite, chewing slowly. That was progress. Jax let the silence sit for a minute before speaking again. "I've been thinking. You never told me who those bastards were back there. The ones hunting you." She froze mid-bite. Jax sighed, rubbing his temple. "Look, I get it. You don't trust me. Fine. But I need to know what I'm dealing with here. If I've got a bounty on my head because of you, I'd at least like to know why." She set the ration down and stared at it for a long moment, as if deciding whether or not to answer. Then, softly, "I was owned." Jax felt something tighten in his chest. He had suspected as much, but hearing her say it in that flat, emotionless tone hit harder than he expected. "They created me for service," she continued, her voice steady but hollow. "I was made to obey, to be used." Jax's fingers curled into a fist against the counter. "They expected me to remain compliant," she said, her silver gaze flicking up to his. "I did not." A muscle in Jax's jaw twitched. He let out a slow breath, forcing himself to relax. "Well," he said finally, voice rough, "they can go to hell." Sierra blinked at him. Jax shrugged, trying to push past the anger simmering under his skin. "They don't own you anymore. You're here now." A long silence stretched between them. Then, softly, she spoke in her own language, a string of quiet, almost melodic syllables. Jax frowned. "Yeah, still don't understand that." She hesitated, then spoke again in his language, the words awkward but clear. "Thank you." Jax looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw something different. Not fear, not emptiness, something cautious, something like hope. He cleared his throat and turned away, grabbing another ration pack from the cabinet and tossing it onto the counter. "Eat up," he muttered. "Don't need you passing out on my ship." She studied him for a moment before nodding. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jax sat in the cockpit, staring at the holographic display in front of him. His name was flashing across a bounty list. Southern Enforcers, 50,000 credits, dead or alive. His lips pressed into a thin line. That was a lot of credits. More than your usual smuggler bounty. He scrolled down. There was a second bounty, larger. Sierra, 200,000 credits, alive only. Jax exhaled through his nose. That confirmed it. Whoever had owned her wasn't just some petty slaver. They were powerful, and they were willing to throw a fortune at getting her back. Which meant they weren't going to stop looking. A shift of movement behind him made him turn. Sierra stood at the edge of the cockpit, her glowing eyes scanning the bounty screen. She didn't look surprised. "You knew," Jax said. A pause, then a small nod. Jax leaned back, rubbing a hand down his face. "Great, just great." Sierra hesitated, then stepped closer. "You regret saving me." Jax let out a tired breath and looked up at her. "No," he admitted, "but I'm wondering what the hell I've just gotten myself into." Sierra studied him for a moment, then, unexpectedly, she sat down beside him. Jax lifted a brow. "Getting comfortable now, huh?" Before she could say anything else, a sharp beeping cut through the silence. Jax's entire body tensed. A distress signal? A locator ping? He flipped a few switches, pulling up the source. It was encrypted, bouncing through multiple relays, making it impossible to trace directly. One short message flashed across the screen. "I see you." A cold prickle ran down Jax's spine. Sierra inhaled softly beside him, barely audible. "Who is it?" Jax's fingers moved over the controls, trying to filter the signal. It was a high-level transmission, not just a random hacker or scavenger. This was deliberate. Before he could answer, the proximity alarm blared. Jax's stomach dropped. He slammed a hand on the console, pulling up external sensors. 3 ships were dropping out of hyperspace. The largest one, a war frigate, loomed ahead, its dark, reinforced hull bearing the unmistakable crimson insignia of the Scythian warlords. Jax felt his pulse spike. He had been expecting bounty hunters. But this was worse. Sierra's entire body tensed beside him. The comm system crackled, and a deep, guttural voice filled the cockpit. "Return the asset, smuggler, and we will spare your life." Jax's hands tightened on the controls. He knew that voice. Vadri's, slaver lord, tyrant, the kind of bastard who bought, sold, and bred sentient beings like livestock. Jax had heard the stories. He had seen the damage men like Vadri's left behind. His eyes flicked to Sierra. Her markings had dimmed, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Jax didn't even hesitate. He cut the comms. A second later, the enemy ships opened fire. The Black Star jerked violently, alarms blaring as energy blasts slammed into the shields. "Strap in," Jax barked, fingers flying over the controls. He spun the ship into a sharp, evasive maneuver, dodging another incoming barrage. "They're trying to disable us," Sierra said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Jax gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I noticed." The targeting system screamed a lock-on warning. Jax cursed and slammed the controls sideways, barely missing an incoming torpedo. They couldn't outrun a war frigate. Not like this. He needed another option. His mind raced as he scanned the battlefield. The frigate was too large to maneuver quickly, but the 2 smaller fighters escorting it, they were a problem. He flicked a switch, rerouting emergency power. If he could take out the fighters, he might have enough time to... The ship lurched hard. A direct hit. "Shields at 40%, the onboard system warned. Jax bit back a curse. Sierra gripped the side of her seat, her silver eyes glowing faintly. She looked calm, but not in a way that meant she wasn't afraid. It was the kind of calm that came from someone who had been trapped before and knew exactly what happened if they got caught. Jax clenched his jaw. They weren't getting caught. He cut the engines. For a split second, the Black Star went completely dead, drifting motionless. The 2 enemy fighters overshot their attack, their targeting systems failing to compensate for the sudden change. Jax reignited the thrusters. Before the enemy pilots could adjust, he flipped the ship, lined up a shot, and fired. A direct hit. The first fighter erupted into a ball of flame. The second veered wildly, trying to correct itself. Jax didn't give it the chance. He rolled the ship, locked on, and sent a missile straight into its cockpit. It was gone in an instant. That just left the war frigate. Jax checked the fuel reserves. Not enough for a long hyperspace jump. He needed another way out. He turned to Sierra. "If you got any ideas, now will be a good time." She didn't respond immediately. But then, her gaze flickered toward the debris field ahead. Jax followed her eyes and grinned. "That'll work." He punched the engines, diving toward the wreckage of an ancient battle site. The frigate followed. Jax weaved through the twisted remains of old warships, forcing the larger vessel to adjust its trajectory. The frigate couldn't turn as quickly as he could. That was its mistake. Jax cut thrusters, spun the ship sharply, and rerouted weapons to full power. A single, well-placed torpedo slammed into a weakened section of the frigate's hull. The explosion ripped through its stabilizers. They didn't wait to see the damage. Jax punched in the coordinates for an untraceable system and slammed the hyperspace lever forward. The stars stretched into infinity. The Black Star vanished into the void. Silence. Jax let out a slow breath. His hands were still white-knuckled on the controls. His pulse thundered in his ears. Beside him, Sierra slumped slightly, exhausted but still upright. "You okay?" Jax asked, voice rough. She exhaled, eyelids heavy. "I need rest." Jax nodded. "Go lie down. I'll keep watch." She hesitated, then stood and walked away, trusting him to guard them. Jax ran a hand through his hair. Vadres wasn't done with them. But tonight, they had won. The Black Star drifted through deep space, safely hidden in the remnants of an ancient battlefield. Twisted wreckage floated aimlessly, the debris of a forgotten war providing perfect cover from any lingering pursuers. The hum of the ship's systems was steady, but the tension inside the cabin hadn't settled. Jack sat in the cockpit, staring at the star maps, but he wasn't really looking at them. His thoughts were elsewhere. They had won this time, but Vadres wasn't done with them. He knew how men like that operated. They didn't let go. They didn't forgive. The warlord hadn't just been hunting her. He had been waiting, watching. The message, "I see you," hadn't been a threat. It had been a promise. Jax clenched his jaw and shut off the hollow display. There was no point staring at it. They needed a plan. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Sierra stood at the edge of the cockpit, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Her presence was quieter now, less guarded than before, though she still held herself like someone who expected the world to turn against her. "You should be resting," Jax said. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "You are still awake." Jax huffed a small laugh. "Yeah, well, hard to sleep when you've got an entire war fleet gunning for you." Sierra studied him for a moment. Then, with quiet certainty, she said, "You are worried?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" She tilted her head slightly, as if considering. "You carry it here." She placed her hand over her chest, just above her heart. Jax's breath caught slightly at the unexpected gesture. Her touch was light, barely there, but the warmth of it lingered even as she pulled away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jax shook his head and leaned back. "I've had worse problems." Sierra's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, something Jax was starting to recognize as disbelief. She didn't buy the act. Jax exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, He stopped himself, reconsidering his words. "We're not safe. Not really. Vadres isn't going to stop. That warship was just the beginning. He'll send more. He'll send better. And sooner or later, we're going to run out of luck." Sierra was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You should leave me behind." Jax's jaw tightened. He turned to face her fully, irritation flashing in his chest. "Yeah? And then what? You think he'll stop looking for you? You think he won't rip apart every system in the Outer Rim to find you?" Her eyes dropped slightly, as if she had already considered that. Jax scoffed and shook his head. "Leaving you behind isn't an option. So if you were hoping I'd dump you on the nearest rock and call it a day, forget it." She looked back up at him, something uncertain flickering across her face. "You do not have to fight for me," she said softly. Jax let out a slow breath. "I know." He met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "But I'm going to anyway." Something shifted in her. He could see it in the way she stood, in the way her markings pulsed ever so faintly, as if caught between emotions she didn't know how to express. Finally, she spoke. "You are not like others." Jax smirked. "Yeah, I get that a lot." She didn't smile, but something in her posture relaxed just a fraction. For her, that was enough. Jax pushed himself to his feet. "Come on, you need to eat something." She followed him to the galley without argument. Jax rummaged through the storage compartments, pulling out another ration pack and tossing it onto the counter. Sierra hesitated before taking it, unfolding the wrapper carefully. He sat across from her, watching as she ate. She was more comfortable now, though her movements were still careful, measured. "You always this quiet?" Jax asked. She glanced up. "You always ask this many questions?" Jax grinned. "Touché." A pause. Then unexpectedly she said, "I was taught to listen, not to speak." Jax frowned. "Yeah, well, you don't have to listen to that anymore." She tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then, for the first time, she asked him something. "Where will we go?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "We." That was new. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. "There's a station on the outer edge of the Cygnus Belt. Old place, but off the grid. No patrols, no registries. We can lay low there for a while." Sierra nodded once, as if accepting the plan without question. Then she did something that caught him completely off guard. She reached across the table, hesitantly, carefully, and brushed her fingers against the back of his hand. It wasn't much, just the briefest touch. But for someone like her, someone who had spent a lifetime knowing only force and control, it meant something. It was a choice. Jax didn't pull away. He just looked at her and said, "Get some rest. We got a long trip ahead." She nodded and stood. But before she left the galley, she paused. Then in the softest voice, she said, "Good night, Jax." It was the first time she had ever spoken his name. And for some reason, it made his chest tighten. Jax exhaled and leaned back, watching as she disappeared down the corridor. Yeah, he was in deep. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he minded. The black star moved steadily through the dark void, a lone shadow slipping between stars. Jax sat in the cockpit, hands on the controls, watching the navigation display as they approached the Cygnus Belt, a remote, lawless sector on the fringes of map space. It wasn't much, but it was far from prying eyes, and for now, that was all that mattered. Beside him, Sierra was quiet, her gaze fixed on the swirling mass of distant nebulae beyond the viewport. She looked calm, but Jax had spent enough time with her now to see past the surface. She was thinking, processing. Jax didn't push. He had learned by now that she spoke when she was ready, not before. Instead, he focused on the station ahead. Mirage Point, a floating scrapyard of abandoned ships and repurposed stations built by outcasts who wanted nothing to do with the galactic core. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions. Exactly what they needed. Jax activated the comms. "Mirage Point, this is Black Star, requesting clearance for docking." A burst of static, then a gruff voice crackled through. "State your business." "Fuel, supplies," Jax said casually. "Maybe a few repairs." A pause. Then, "You got credits?" "Enough." Another pause. Then, finally, "Docking Bay 17. Keep your weapons holstered and don't start trouble." Jax smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. The comms cut out, and Jax guided the ship toward the docking bay. As the station loomed closer, he could see the patchwork nature of the place. Rusted hulls welded on in newer sections, blinking neon signs barely clinging to life, a maze of corridors built from stolen ships. It was a dump, but it was safe. As the landing gear locked into place with a dull thunk, Jax turned to Sierra. "All right, welcome to Mirage Point. It's not pretty, but it'll keep us hidden for a while." She studied the station for a moment, then looked at him. "How long?" Jax shrugged. "As long as we need. Long enough to figure out what comes next." She nodded, then unbuckled her harness, moving toward the cargo hold. Jax watched her go, something unreadable twisting in his chest. He had meant what he said. They needed time, a plan, a way to make sure Vaidres and his warlords didn't keep hunting them across the galaxy. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't just planning for himself. And that scared him more than any bounty ever could. The marketplace inside Mirage Point was as chaotic as Jax remembered. The air smelled of engine grease and spice. The metallic corridors crowded with merchants, mercenaries, and smugglers bartering for everything from weapons to stolen tech. Jax moved through the crowd with practiced ease, keeping his head low, scanning for any sign of trouble. Sierra walked beside him, her hood pulled up over her silver hair, blending into the shifting mass of traders and thieves. She moved differently now, not as wary, not as tense. She was still cautious, but she was no longer waiting for someone to grab her. Jax didn't know why that realization made his chest tighten. They reached a supply vendor, a grizzled old man with mechanical limbs and a face full of scars. Jax leaned against the counter. "I need fuel, rations, and a clean item tag for my ship." The vendor grunted. "Clean tags ain't cheap." Jax tossed a small credit chip onto the counter. "And I ain't broke." "That enough?" The man ran a scanner over the chip, then nodded. "Yeah, it'll take a few hours." Jax exhaled. "Fine. Load up the other supplies while we wait." As the vendor started gathering the rations, Jax felt a shift in the air. He turned slightly, just in time to see a group of men at the far end of the market, talking in low voices. Bounty hunters. Jax's gut tightened. He recognized the distinctive insignia on their sleeves. Independent contractors, but the kind who took jobs from powerful employers. Like Vaidres. They weren't looking in his direction yet, But it was only a matter of time before someone on this station recognized his face from the bounty lists. Jax turned to Sierra. We need to move. Now. She didn't question it. She just followed. They weaved through the market, moving fast, but not panicked, keeping to the shadows of the narrow corridors. Jax guided her toward a back exit, one that led to the maintenance tunnels, an old smuggler's trick. But before they could reach it, one of the bounty hunters turned, and their eyes met. For a second, there was only silence. Then the man reached for his comm. Jax moved first. He grabbed a metal crate and hurled it straight into the hunter's chest, knocking him back before he could send a message. The crowd erupted into chaos, people shouting, scrambling for cover. Sierra grabbed Jax's wrist. Come. They ran. Blaster fire erupted behind them, bolts slamming into metal walls as they ducked into the maintenance tunnels. The air was thick with steam and oil, the overhead lights flickering as they raced through the narrow passages. Jax pulled a small detonator from his belt and tossed it behind them. The tunnel shook as an explosion tore through the passage, cutting off their pursuers for now. They didn't stop running until they reached the docking bay. Jax slammed his fist against the ship's controls, and the ramp hissed open. They rushed inside, the door sealing behind them just as an alarm blared across the station. Strap in, Jax shouted, sprinting to the cockpit. Sierra slid into the co-pilot's seat, fingers moving instinctively over the controls, like she had done this before. Jax didn't have time to question it. He fired up the thrusters, disengaged the docking clamps, and punched the engines to full power. The Black Star lurched upward, breaking free from the station's docking bay just as security ships scrambled to intercept. Hang on, Jax growled, twisting the controls into a sharp, evasive maneuver. The ship dove into open space, spiraling past the station's perimeter defenses. Sierra's fingers moved over the targeting system. Two ships closing fast. Jax swore. He slammed the hyperspace coordinates into the NAV system, his pulse hammering. One of the enemy ships locked on. Sierra's silver eyes flashed. The targeting system glitched. The enemy ship fired too early, its torpedo missing by inches. Jax didn't stop to think. He grabbed the hyperspace lever and pulled. The Black Star streaked into the void, vanishing into the stars. Silence filled the cabin. Jax let out a slow breath, his grip still tight on the controls. Sierra exhaled beside him, her glow dimming slightly. He turned to her. You okay? She looked at him, really looked at him. You did not leave me behind, she said softly. Jax's throat felt tight. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he said, I never will. For the first time, Sierra smiled. And Jax knew, in that moment, that he would burn the galaxy down before letting anyone take her away again. The Black Star drifted through the endless void, safely out of reach, at least for now. The ship's engines hummed softly, a rhythmic pulse that filled the silence. Inside the dimly lit cockpit, Jax sat in his chair, staring out at the distant stars. His fingers tapped idly against the console, but his mind wasn't on the controls. It was on her. Sierra sat across from him in the co-pilot's seat, her silver eyes reflecting the distant galaxies outside. The soft glow of her markings pulsed in slow, steady waves, as if mirroring her thoughts. She had changed. So had he. They weren't just running anymore. They were building something. Jax exhaled and turned to her. We can't keep this up forever. She glanced at him. Running. He nodded. Eventually, Vadries is going to send something bigger. Smarter. We need a real plan. A way to end this for good. She was silent for a moment, then asked, What do you suggest? Jax rubbed the back of his neck. A few options. We could disappear, really disappear. Find a system so deep in uncharted space that no one would ever find us. Or, his voice hardened, we could make sure Vadries doesn't come after you ever again. Sierra studied him, tilting her head slightly. You would fight for that? Jax met her gaze. I'd do more than fight. Something flickered in her expression. Something warm, hesitant but real. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him like a temporary ally. She was looking at him like home. Jax cleared his throat and stood. Come on, let's talk in the mess hall. I need a drink. They sat at the worn-out table in the ship's small galley. Jax poured himself a glass of something strong and bitter, then slid a second cup toward Sierra. She sniffed it cautiously before taking a tentative sip. Her expression twisted immediately. "This is unpleasant." Jax smirked. "Acquired taste." She set the cup down, unimpressed. "And yet, you continue drinking it. Some things are worth the burn." Sierra's gaze lingered on him, thoughtful. "You speak as if you know hardship." Jax let out a low chuckle. "Let's just say I didn't grow up on the rich side of the galaxy." He swirled the drink in his glass. "I was born on a backwater moon, the kind of place no one cares about. Spent most of my life looking for a way out." Sierra nodded, as if she understood that all too well. "And now?" Jax exhaled. "Now, I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." He looked at her, voice softer. "What about you? What do you want?" Sierra hesitated, as if she had never been asked that before. Then, quietly, she said, "I do not know." Jax set his glass down. "Then let's figure it out together." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, with slow certainty, she reached across the table and rested her hand over his. Her fingers were cool, delicate, but her touch was steady. A choice. A promise. Jax swallowed hard. He hadn't been expecting that, but he didn't pull away. "You are important to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax felt his pulse quicken. "Yeah." She nodded. "Yes." Jax let out a breathless chuckle. "Well, good. Because you're important to me, too." Her markings pulsed brighter for a fraction of a second, and for the first time, she smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. Jax's chest tightened at the sight. Before he could say anything else, the ship's sensors beeped softly. Not an alarm, just a proximity signal. They had entered a new star system, a place Jax had set as a waypoint. A planet loomed ahead, its surface covered in lush green forests and sprawling oceans. A world untouched by war, by slavers, by anyone who would hunt them. A fresh start. Jax turned back to Sierra. "What do you think?" She gazed at the planet, then at him. "I think it could be home." Jax's lips twitched into a smile. "Yeah, I think so too." Later that night, as the ship touched down on the planet's surface, Jax and Sarah stood beneath an open sky for the first time in what felt like forever. The twin moons cast a soft glow over the landscape, the air thick with the scent of alien flowers. It was quiet, peaceful. Sierra took a slow breath, as if tasting freedom. Jax watched her, hands in his pockets. "You know, in human culture, when someone finds the person they want to spend their life with, they have a tradition." She turned to him, curious. "A tradition?" "Yeah." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring, a band of metal he had shaped from a piece of the Black Star. "In my world, this means forever," he said, his voice quieter now. "If you'll have me." Sierra studied the ring. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand. Her markings shifted, forming a delicate, glowing pattern around her wrist, her species' version of a bond, a promise of eternity. She met his gaze. "Then I give you the same." Jax let out a slow breath, then slid the ring onto her finger. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Her hands settled on his chest, her glow pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "Forever," she whispered. Jax smiled. "Forever." And beneath the twin moons, they sealed their fate, bound by the stars, bound by love, bound by something greater than either of them had ever known. For the first time, they weren't running. They had found their home, and they had found each other.